For days, the story sounded simple. Prince Harry wanted to bring Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet back to Britain. King Charles wanted to see his grandchildren. The palace was making quiet offers. The government said no to the security Harry believed his family needed. And suddenly, another possible family reunion was hanging by a thread. That is the version most people heard. But there is another version of this story, a quieter one, a more painful one. Because according to reports, the most important stop on Harry's planned route was not Buckingham Palace, it was not Clarence House, it was not a formal meeting with his father, and it was not some carefully staged royal photo opportunity. It was Althorp, the Spencer family estate, the place where Princess Diana is buried. And once you understand that, the whole story changes. Because this was not only about a prince trying to come home, it was not only about a son trying to see a father. It was not even only about a long royal feud, or security, or Meghan, or headlines, or all the familiar arguments that always appear whenever Harry's name is mentioned. At the emotional center of this story were two children, Archie and Lilibet. Two children who have never known their grandmother. Two children who know Princess Diana only through stories, photographs, and the way their father still speaks about her. Two children who, according to the reported plan, were supposed to stand at her resting place for the first time. And then the answer came back. No. Not from William. Not from Charles, at least not directly. Not from a dramatic palace confrontation behind closed doors. From the system, from the security process, from the government machinery, from a committee most people had never heard of until Harry's life became tangled up in it. And that is why this story matters. Because if you strip away the noise, if you take away the royal commentary and the tabloid shouting, and the endless debate over who is right and who is wrong, what you are left with is brutally simple. A father wanted to take his children to visit their grandmother's grave, and the state said it could not give him the protection he said they needed to do it safely. That is not the kind of royal story people usually slow down for. It is not flashy. It does not give you an easy villain with a crown on his head. It does not fit neatly into the usual argument of Harry versus William, Meghan versus the palace, California versus Britain. But maybe that is exactly why it hits harder. Because it is human. Everyone was looking at the palace. But Harry, it seems, was looking past the palace. He was looking at a lake in Northamptonshire, a private island, a grave that belongs not to the monarchy, but to the Spencer family. That detail matters. Diana was not buried among kings and queens. She was not placed in Westminster Abbey, surrounded by the long stone memory of the British crown. She was brought back to Althorp, to the estate of her own family, the place connected to the Spencer name long before she became the Princess of Wales. Her grave sits on an island in the middle of an ornamental lake. It is secluded. It is protected by distance and water. It is not a public stage. It is not a tourist spectacle in the usual sense. It is quiet by design. And that makes it different from almost every other place connected to Diana. Kensington Palace has gates, flowers, crowds, cameras, memories of public mourning. Westminster Abbey has history and ceremony. London has statues, streets, palaces, flashbulbs, and all the weight of what Diana became to the world. But Althorp is something else. Althorp is where the world finally stops speaking over her. For Harry, that place is not a landmark. It is not a content backdrop. It is not a symbol to be managed by advisors. It is where his mother is. And that is why the reported plan to bring Archie and Lilibet there carries so much emotional weight. Because there are two different Dianas in public memory. There is Diana the icon, Diana in the black revenge dress, Diana holding hands with patients, Diana in front of cameras, Diana on magazine covers, Diana walking through minefields, Diana crying in interviews, Diana smiling through pain, Diana as the woman the world still refuses to let go of. And then there is Diana the mother. Not the global figure, not the saint or the rebel or the style legend, just the mother who had two boys, the mother Harry lost when he was 12. And that is the Diana Harry would have wanted his children to understand first, not the myth, the grandmother. Imagine trying to explain someone like Diana to children who never met her. How do you do that? You can show them pictures. You can say, "This was your grandmother." You can tell them she was warm, she was funny, she cared about people, she hated the stiffness around her, She loved her boys. You can tell them the world adored her. You can tell them the world also chased her. You can tell them she was famous before they were born, before their father was grown, before their own lives became part of the same public obsession. But stories only go so far. At some point, children need a place. A place turns family history into something real. A place says, she was not just a picture, she was not just a name adults say with a certain sadness in their voice. She lived, she was loved, she belonged somewhere. And this is where we come to remember her. That is what Althorp could have been for Archie and Lilibet. Not a royal engagement, not a reconciliation summit, a first meeting with a grandmother they can never actually meet. And this is where the official language around the story starts to feel so painfully small. Because the formal issue was security. The question was whether Harry and his family would receive the level of police protection he believes is necessary when they are in the United Kingdom. Reports say the government declined the request for police protection outside royal residences. Harry has long argued that private security is not the same in Britain because private guards do not have the same access to intelligence or police powers. The government, as governments do, gave the kind of answer governments give. The protective security system is rigorous. It is proportionate. Individual arrangements are not discussed in detail because that could compromise security. That may be true. It may also be legally correct. It may be procedurally clean. It may make perfect sense inside the framework of how official protection is assessed. But the emotional result is still this. The children did not get to go. And that is the gap this story lives inside. On one side, there is procedure. On the other, there is a family standing at the edge of a memory they cannot reach. That is what makes the story different from the usual royal drama. The usual royal drama invites people to pick a team. Are you with Harry or are you with the palace? Do you trust Meghan or do you not? Is Charles cold or trapped by the institution? Is William protecting the future of the monarchy or refusing to forgive his brother? Those questions are loud. This story is quieter. It asks something else. What happens when the human thing, the obviously human thing, cannot get through the formal door? And if you have ever had a family moment ruined by paperwork, by rules, by timing, by institutions, by people who may not even be cruel, but still hold the power to say no, then you understand the ache of it. Not everything that hurts is caused by someone screaming. Sometimes it is caused by a decision written in calm language. Sometimes the most painful sentence in the world is not an insult. It is, request denied. That is why the word reportedly used to describe Harry's reaction matters. Not furious, not explosive, not vengeful, distraught, extremely upset. There is a difference. Anger is what people expect from Harry now. The public has been trained to see him through that lens. Angry at the press, angry at the palace, angry at his brother, angry at the system, angry at the loss of security, angry at the life he had and the life he left. But being distraught is different. Distraught is not about winning an argument. Distraught is what happens when something private collapses. It is the emotion of a father who thought he had found a way to bring his children into a missing chapter of their own story, and then watched that plan fall apart days before it could happen. If this already feels different from the usual royal noise, stay with this story, because the deeper you go into it, the less it looks like a scandal, and the more it looks like a wound that never really closed. Harry's relationship with Britain has become almost impossible to separate from security. Since stepping back from royal duties in 2020, he has repeatedly argued that he cannot safely bring his family to the UK without adequate protection. He has taken legal action. He has lost legal battles. He has spoken about paparazzi, threats, risk, and the unique danger created by his public profile. To some people, this sounds entitled. To others, it sounds obvious. But whichever side you are on, there is one part of Harry's fear that cannot be brushed aside lightly. His mother died after being pursued by photographers in Paris. That fact sits underneath every security conversation involving Harry, whether people want to admit it or not. You can debate policy. You can debate taxpayer money. You can debate whether a non-working royal should receive automatic police protection. You can debate whether Harry should have expected consequences after leaving royal duties. You can debate all of that, but you cannot ask Harry to forget how his mother died. You cannot ask him to treat paparazzi as a minor inconvenience. You cannot ask him to look at his children, look at the cameras, look at the history of his own childhood, and simply relax. For Harry, security is not an administrative preference, it is tied to trauma. And when the planned visit includes Diana's grave, that connection becomes even sharper. Because the same history is everywhere in this story. The mother who was chased, the son who survived the loss, the grandchildren who never met her, the country that still claims to love Diana, the system that now says it cannot provide what Harry says he needs to bring them safely to her resting place. That is the emotional contradiction. Britain remembers Diana endlessly, every anniversary, every documentary, every royal comparison, every time Catherine wears something that reminds people of her, every time Meghan is measured against her, every time William or Harry speaks about grief, Diana returns. She is everywhere in the national memory. And yet, in this moment, her own grandchildren reportedly could not be brought to her grave under the conditions their father considered safe. That is what gives the story its sting. Not because the government necessarily sat there and said, "Let us block children from Diana's grave." That would be too simple, too cartoonish, too easy. The pain is subtler than that. The pain is that the system does not need to intend the emotional consequence in order to create it. A committee can review risk, a department can follow rules, a spokesperson can issue careful lines. Everyone can stay inside their lane. No one has to raise their voice. No one has to look cruel. And still, two children do not get to stand where their grandmother is buried. That is how institutions often work. They do not always break your heart dramatically. Sometimes, they break it efficiently. And Althorp, of all places, makes that feel almost unbearably ironic. Because Diana's burial at Althorp was itself a kind of withdrawal from the machinery around her. She had lived in the center of a royal storm. Her marriage became public property. Her pain became public property. Her face became public property. Even her grief, her motherhood, her loneliness, her attempts to rebuild herself, all of it became material for the world. At Althorp, she was finally placed somewhere quieter, not in the royal heart of London, not in a space designed for state ceremony, not under the constant footfall of crowds, on an island, apart, protected. After a life where privacy was so often denied to her, her resting place was chosen for privacy. And now, almost 3 decades later, privacy and protection are again the very things at issue. Harry wants to bring his children quietly. Reports say the family trip was not meant to turn Archie and Lilibet into public performers. They were not expected to appear at public engagements. The point was not to parade them through Britain. The point was family. A grandfather, perhaps. Friends, perhaps. Charitable connections, perhaps. And Althorp. But the media machine did what it always does. It flattened the story. It turned it into Meghan will not come. Harry demands security. Charles refuses to intervene. The government says no. Another Sussex drama. Another chapter in the endless soap opera. And yes, those elements are part of the public story, but they are not the emotional center. The emotional center is a father trying to give his children a memory he never got to keep whole. Because Harry's memories of Diana are frozen in childhood. He does not have the adult version of his mother. He does not have memories of her growing older, becoming a grandmother, holding his children, seeing who he became. He cannot call her for advice. He cannot ask what she would think of California, or Meghan, or Archie's laugh, or Lilibet's personality, or the impossible mess of royal life after her death. All he has are memories from before he was 13, and then the lifelong work of trying to build meaning around a loss that happened in front of the entire world. That is why bringing his children to Althorp would not be a small gesture. It would be Harry connecting 2 broken ends of time. The boy who walked behind the coffin, the man who now has children of his own, the mother he lost, the grandchildren she never held, the island where she rests, the children who have never stood there. That is the story, and once you see it, the usual gossip starts to feel almost indecently small. Because who cares, in this exact moment, whether Meghan wants to avoid Britain? Who cares whether commentators think Harry is dramatic? Who cares whether palace insiders are irritated? Who cares whether every royal expert has a theory about strategy? At the center of it is a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl who may have been about to take their first real step into their father's deepest family memory. And they did not. That is not a headline designed to make people angry. It is a headline designed to make people quiet. There is also something powerful about the fact that Althorp is not royal property. This matters more than it seems. If Harry had wanted only to bring his children into the royal fold, the emotional focus would be on palaces, protocol, titles, and the king. But Althorp belongs to the Spencer side of the family. It is Diana's side. It is the side that reminds everyone Harry is not only Windsor, he is also his mother's son. That identity has always mattered in how the public sees him, and probably in how he sees himself. William, as heir to the throne, had to move toward the institution. His life was built around that path from the beginning. Harry's path was different. He was close enough to the crown to be shaped by it, but never meant to inherit it. He was royal, but secondary. Visible, but not central. Protected by the institution, but also consumed by it. Diana became the emotional language through which many people understood him. The boy behind the coffin. The wounded prince. The son who carried her rebellious tenderness. The one who seemed most likely to break away. Whether that image is fair or too simple is another question, but it is part of why this story resonates, because Althorp is not just a place on a map. It is the part of Harry's identity that existed before and beyond the crown, and maybe that is what he wanted Archie and Lilibet to feel. Not the pressure of being royal-adjacent children, not the weight of titles, not the awkwardness of palace negotiations, not the tension between adults who have said too much and forgiven too little. Just this: your grandmother is here. She was my mother. She loved me. She would have loved you. That is the kind of sentence a child remembers, even if they do not fully understand it yet. And this is where the story becomes bigger than Harry, because every family has places like this: a grave, a house, a church, a street, a kitchen, a photograph album, a tree in a yard, a country someone left, a language someone stopped speaking, a room no one enters anymore. Places where children learn who they are by meeting people who are no longer alive. And when those places are blocked, delayed, or made unreachable, something is lost. Not legally, maybe, but emotionally. Heritage is not only documents and names. It is the moment a parent kneels beside a child and says, "This is where we come from." Harry was reportedly trying to create that moment. And the cruel thing is, it would probably have been a quiet moment. No grand speech, no cameras needed, no balcony, no anthem, no public reconciliation carefully leaked to the press. Just a father, his children, and the grave of the woman whose death shaped his entire life. That is why this refusal feels larger than a security decision. Because the decision may have been about protection, but the consequence was about memory. And memory is the one thing Harry has fought hardest to protect. If you look back at the way Harry has spoken about his life, there is a constant thread running through it. He does not only talk about what happened, he talks about what was taken from him by the way it happened. His mother was taken. His private grief was taken. His childhood was turned into a public image. His walk behind Diana's coffin became one of the most replayed images in modern royal history. People around the world remember it, but Harry had to live it. That is a very strange kind of grief. The world says, "We remember your mother." But sometimes what it really means is, we remember the version of your mother we kept for ourselves. And Harry has spent much of his adult life trying to reclaim the part of Diana that belonged to him and William before she belonged to history. That is why Althorp matters. It is one of the few places where the public myth of Diana becomes secondary to the family reality of Diana. At Althorp, she is not only the people's princess, she is not only the woman in every documentary, every comparison, every anniversary package. She is a daughter of the Spencer family. She is a sister. She is a mother. She is a grandmother who never got to be one. And Harry, according to reports, wanted his children to encounter that version of her. Not through a streaming documentary, not through a palace portrait, Not through strangers arguing about her on television, through a place that says, before the crown, before the cameras, before the tragedy, she was family. That is the emotional point that so many headlines miss, because a headline needs conflict, it needs tension, it needs names people can fight over in the comments. So the story becomes, Harry's demand rejected, Meghan may skip the trip, Charles will not intervene, another security row erupts. All of that may be part of the surface, but it is not the heart. The heart is that Archie and Lilibet are growing up with a grandmother who is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Everywhere in the culture, everywhere in the royal story, everywhere in their father's emotional life, but nowhere in the ordinary ways a grandmother should be. No birthdays, no visits, no stories told in her own voice, no hand on a shoulder, no memory that belongs only to the children and not to the world. And that is why a visit to a grave can mean so much. For adults, a grave can be a place of mourning. For children, it can be the first outline of someone they are trying to understand. It gives shape to absence. It says, this person is real enough that we came here. This person matters enough that we made the journey. This person is part of you, even though you never met. That is not politics. That is family. And it is precisely the family part that makes the security issue so complicated. Because the moment Harry returns to Britain, he is never just a private citizen. He may no longer be a working royal, but he is still the king's son. He is still Diana's son. He is still one of the most recognizable people in the world. His children are still connected to the line of succession. Their names still carry royal weight, even if their daily lives are thousands of miles from palace gates. So people ask, why should the state protect him? And Harry asks, how can I bring my family without protection? That is the deadlock. And inside that deadlock sits the grave of his mother. This is why the story does not work if you treat it like a normal celebrity security dispute. It is not the same as an actor wanting an escort through an airport. It is not the same as a billionaire asking for special treatment. It is not even the same as a politician asking for protection. Harry's risk is tied to the institution he was born into, the press attention he never chose as a child, the threats that come with his public role, and the unresolved history of Diana's death. You can still argue about who should pay. You can still argue about what is fair. You can still argue about whether RAVEC made the right call under its rules. But if you ignore the Diana piece, you are not telling the whole story. Because for Harry, the question is not simply, can I visit the UK? It is, can I bring my children into the place where my own childhood was broken, and keep them safe while I do it? That is a much heavier question. And it explains why the reported refusal landed with such force. It was not just a practical obstacle. It was a reminder that Harry's connection to Britain is still conditional, still complicated, still filtered through structures that may never fully understand the emotional cost of saying no. What makes this even more painful is that there seemed to be a possible softening around the family. Reports suggested that King Charles wanted to see Archie and Lilibet. The children had not seen him in person for years. The idea of a private meeting was significant, especially after so much distance, so much public bitterness, so many years of fractured trust. For Charles, it could have been a grandfather moment. For Harry, maybe it could have been a small step towards something less frozen. But again, the public conversation jumped immediately to the royal angle. Will Charles see the grandchildren? Will Meghan attend? Will Harry meet his father? Will William be involved? Will there be a thaw? Will there be another betrayal? Those are the questions that feed the machine. But the reported Althorp plan adds a different question. What if the visit was not primarily about repairing the Windsor story? What if it was about giving Archie and Lilibet access to the Spencer story? That shift changes the emotional hierarchy of the trip. Charles matters. Of course he matters. A living grandfather matters. A possible reunion matters. A family that has been publicly fractured matters. But Diana matters in a different way. Because Diana cannot invite them. Diana cannot call. Diana cannot say, bring the children, I want to see them. Diana cannot repair anything from her side. The only person who can bring those children to her is Harry, and if he cannot do it, the moment disappears again. That is why the image is so haunting. Harry may still go alone. That possibility says almost everything. Because Harry has gone back to Britain alone before. Short visits, careful visits, sudden visits, visits surrounded by speculation, visits where every movement becomes a clue. He knows how to enter and leave his own country like someone passing through a guarded corridor. But going alone to Althorp is not the same as bringing his children. Going alone means the pattern continues. Harry carries Diana by himself. Harry mourns by himself. Harry visits by himself. Harry returns to that island in his memory without the next generation beside him. And that is the tragedy inside the logistics. The trip may still happen in some form. Lawyers may still argue. Officials may still review arrangements. Security options may still be explored. Harry may still find a way to come. Some private meeting may still take place. The story may change again because royal stories always do. But this particular moment, the first planned visit of Archie and Lilibet to their grandmother's resting place, has already been marked by uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of becoming its own kind of loss. Children grow quickly. A 7-year-old and a 5-year-old understand more than adults sometimes realize. They understand when a trip is planned. They understand when adults are careful with their words. They understand when something important is supposed to happen and then does not. Maybe Harry and Meghan shield them from most of it. Maybe they do not know the details. But someday, they will know the story. Someday, they will know that their father tried to bring them to Britain, that he wanted them to know his mother not only as a famous woman, not only as a face in history, but as their grandmother, that there was a plan, that there was a problem, that the answer was no, or not now, or not safely enough. And that will become part of their inheritance too, not just Diana's memory, the difficulty of reaching it. That is the part people should sit with before turning this into another shouting match. Because it is easy to say Harry should stop complaining. It is easy to say he left, so he must live with the consequences. It is easy to say no one is entitled to special treatment. It is easy to say the government has rules for a reason. Some of that may even be reasonable. But none of it erases the sadness of the specific thing that was lost here. 2 children did not get to go to Althorp. And if that sentence does not feel heavy at first, think about what Althorp represents. It is not a palace. It is not power. It is not privilege in the emotional sense, even if it is an aristocratic estate. In this story, Althorp represents the one place where Harry can tell his children, "This is not about the crown. This is about my mother." That is a rare thing in his life. Almost everything around Harry is interpreted through the crown. His marriage, his children, his interviews, his lawsuits, his grief, his work, his home in California, even his silence. Everything becomes a referendum on royalty. But a grave is different. A grave does not care about public relations. It does not care about palace briefings. It does not care about who is popular this week. It asks only whether you came. And that is why the final image of this story is not a committee room. It is not a security document. It is not a palace gate. It is a father standing somewhere in his mind, with 2 children beside him, trying to cross the distance between memory and reality. He can describe the lake. He can describe the island. He can describe the quiet. He can describe how people still leave flowers. He can describe Diana's laugh, or what he remembers of it. He can describe what it felt like to be loved by her. But he cannot make that the same as being there. And maybe that is why this story has touched a nerve beneath the usual royal arguments. Because most people know what it is like to want one simple human thing and be told that the answer is complicated. To want to visit someone. To want to say goodbye. To want to introduce a child to a piece of family history. To want a moment that seems emotionally necessary while the world responds with forms, rules, procedures, and risk assessments. That is the real conflict here. Not Harry versus Charles. Not Harry versus William. Not Meghan versus Britain. Memory versus machinery. A son's grief versus a state's process. 2 children's inheritance versus a security decision. And if this story feels different from the usual royal scandal, that is because it is. It does not need us to hate anyone to understand the pain. It does not need a villain twirling a mustache. It does not need a palace conspiracy. It does not even need every official decision to be wrong. It only needs us to notice the result. Diana's grandchildren still have not stood at her grave, and Harry, the boy who lost her in front of the world, is still trying to find a way to bring his own children safely to the place where the world finally had to leave her in peace. That is the part worth remembering when the next wave of commentary arrives, because it will arrive. Someone will say this is Harry manipulating public sympathy. Someone will say Meghan is behind it. Someone will say Charles should intervene. Someone will say Charles must not intervene. Someone will say the children are being used. Someone will say the government is heartless. Someone will say the government is simply following the rules. And the story will be pulled apart until the original human shape is almost unrecognizable. So before that happens, hold on to the simple version. Not the simplistic version, the simple one. A man who lost his mother as a child wanted to take his own children to her grave. The plan depended on protection. The protection was not granted in the way he hoped, and the children did not get that first visit. That is enough. That is already a story. If you have been following the royal family for years, tell me honestly in the comments, do you think this changes the way the security dispute should be seen? Or do you think the rules have to stay the same, no matter how personal the visit is? Because that is the uncomfortable question. Not whether Harry is likable, not whether Meghan is popular, not whether the monarchy has handled everything perfectly. The question is whether a system can be technically correct and still create a deeply painful result. And in this case, that is exactly what appears to have happened. There is a final sadness here that is easy to miss. Diana's public legacy is built on closeness. People remember her touching hands others were afraid to touch, sitting beside people others ignored, looking directly at people who felt invisible, breaking the coldness of royal distance with something warmer, less polished, more human. That is why so many people loved her. She made the institution feel, for a moment, like it had a heartbeat. And now the story of her grandchildren trying to reach her grave has become another story about distance. Distance between Harry and Britain. Distance between Harry and the royal family. Distance between Archie, Lilibet, and the country tied to their names. Distance between a grandmother's memory and the children who inherited it. That distance is what Harry was reportedly trying to close. Not with a speech, not with a demand for public sympathy, not with a balcony appearance. With a visit. A quiet one. The kind of visit ordinary families make all the time, without headlines, without committees, without national debate. They get in a car, they bring flowers, they stand for a while. They tell the children a story. They go home carrying something sad, but also something settled. That ordinary privilege is what Harry does not have. Nothing is ordinary around him. Even grief has to pass through security arrangements. Even a grandmother's grave becomes a national argument. Even children meeting family history becomes a question of risk, optics, cost, and precedent. And maybe that is the real cost of royal life long after someone leaves it. You can leave the working role. You can leave the palace. You can leave the country. You can build a new home. But you cannot make the world stop treating your most private moments as public property. Harry knows that better than almost anyone. He learned it at 12. And now, nearly 30 years after Diana's death, he is trying to make sure his own children do not learn it the same way. That is why he does not want them chased from the moment they land. That is why he says safety follows the person, not the place. That is why the offer of accommodation, even royal accommodation, does not solve the whole problem for him. Because the journey to Althorp is not only about where they sleep, it is about every movement between the airport, the road, the estate, the private moments, the places where photographers might gather, the places where plans leak, the places where children stop being children and become images. Harry has lived that transformation. He knows what it does, and whether you agree with every decision he has made or not, it is hard to miss the fear behind this one. He is not only protecting his family from danger, he is protecting a moment from being consumed. Because imagine if Archie and Lilibet's first visit to Diana's grave became a long-lens photograph splashed across front pages. Imagine if their first encounter with that place was not private grief, but public spectacle. Harry would see that not as publicity, but as repetition. The same machine that consumed Diana consuming the next generation's relationship with her. That is what he is trying to avoid, and that is why the refusal cuts so deeply. Without the protection he trusts, he may choose not to bring them at all. And if he does not bring them, the machine wins in another way. The cameras do not get the picture. But the children do not get the memory. That is the impossible corner Harry is in. Bring them, and risk the kind of exposure he fears. Do not bring them, and postpone one of the most meaningful family moments he could give them. There is no clean victory in that choice, only damage control. And that is why reducing this to Harry wants special treatment misses the emotional mechanics of the story. He wants something very ordinary. He wants to take his children to their grandmother. The extraordinary part is everything around it. The titles, the history, the paparazzi, the security committee, the palace, the government, the death that still echoes, the public that still watches. All of that surrounds one simple wish until the wish itself starts to look controversial. But it is not controversial, it is human. And maybe that is why this angle matters more than the louder ones, because the louder ones give people permission to sneer. They turn the story into money, ego, entitlement, strategy, revenge, optics. This angle makes sneering harder. It asks you to imagine the children. It asks you to imagine Harry not as a brand, not as a problem, not as a former working royal, but as a father standing between his past and his children's future. It asks you to imagine Diana not as a symbol in another debate, but as the missing person at the center of a family. And it asks you to sit with the fact that sometimes the most painful royal stories are not the explosive ones. Sometimes they are the quiet ones. The ones where nothing dramatic happens because something meaningful never got the chance to happen. No meeting at the grave, no children by the lake, no first memory of Althorp, no moment where Harry could say, "This is where she is, and this is why she matters to us." Just another cancelled plan. Another private disappointment turned into public argument. Another reminder that Diana's death did not end the struggle over privacy, family, and the crown. It only changed the people carrying it. So when people ask what was really blocked here, the answer depends on how closely they are willing to look. On paper, it was a security request. In the news cycle, it was another Sussex controversy. Inside the family, it may have been something much smaller and much bigger at the same time. A missed visit, a missed introduction, a missed chance for two children to stand where their grandmother rests and begin to understand why their father still carries her with him everywhere. And that is why this story should not end with shouting. It should end with the image everyone seems to be avoiding. Not Harry at war with the palace. Not Meghan blamed for another decision. Not Charles trapped between fatherhood and monarchy. Not William somewhere in the background of another imagined feud. Just Althorp, the lake, the island, the quiet, and the absence of two children who were supposed to be there. Diana died when Harry was 12 years old. Nearly 30 years later, his own children still have not been able to stand at her grave. Not because he forgot. Not because he did not want to take them, but because, once again, the most human part of the story ran into the coldest part of the system, and the system said no. If this story made you see the situation differently, stay with the channel, because the royal story is rarely just what the loudest headline says it is. Sometimes the real story is not in the palace at all. Sometimes it is at the grave no one reached.